I'm going to try to explain you from the dairy perspective if climate change is really a driver for our production. So just to start, to introduce what is the IDF, the association that I work for. We are a non-profit organization, and we cover 44 member countries in the world that produce dairy. So we have a national committee in every country, and we represent the entire sector. So we have members from academia, governments, cooperatives, processors in this national committee. We have a network of 100,000 experts, which cover a wide range of professional activities. So we have nutritionists, technologists, from the manufacturer, milk production, farmers, etc. And we are actually very old. We were founded in 1903 here in Brussels, and this gave us some time to develop a lot of relations with many organizations. I put here that we are accredited to FAO, Codex, OIE, UNEP, but we have more than 100 organizations with whom we have relations. And our activities are to provide science-based evidence and advice for standard setting and regulation for the dairy sector. We are the global voice to the international organizations in terms of dairy, and we provide a forum to reach consensus on key issues. We have a lot of working groups, and we have two that are directly linked to climate change. One is farm management and another on environment. And we have around 200 experts working on these working groups. And from my perspective and IDF's perspective, yes, the environmental performance is currently, I think, one of the key drivers of the dairy sector, and I would say the livestock sector, because we are making the producers responsible for the climate change that is being produced due to this environmental performance of the livestock. We have here an article of The Guardian, say that even the farmers are calling for national strategies for climate change and agriculture. This was when the IPCC report was released. We have the policymakers, the European Commission or FAO pushing for more sustainable livestock, and as well the consumers, because they demand a greener livestock sector. So everyone is asking the dairy sector or the livestock sector to perform better. And just to continue with what Bas was saying, I think one of the ways that we can do an environmental, so the way to push for better environmental performance is to use carbon farming schemes. And currently there are many in place which are either public, made by countries, or private standards. And I think this is going to be before it was a nice to have, and I think it's going to be now a must. Because we have increasing regulatory requirements for farmers and industry, they will not be able to escape this. And there's a new market, the greenhouse gas market. So if you want to buy or sell offsetting credits, ask for carbon neutrality, have carbon strategies and policies, you need to be part of these carbon schemes. And if you want to improve your performance or your environmental impact as well. In terms of the regulators, everyone is asking for a new public policy. So we need a solid base using these carbon farming schemes to build it. And they also need to report to the UN bodies on the achievement of the SDGs, in particular climate change. So they will be asking for this. And the consumers, yeah, they can benefit from a scheme that is agreed between farmers, industry, and regulators. So they will be maybe willing to pay more. And currently there are many carbon farming schemes only on climate change. You can find different types. For example, environmental management, you can certify yourself as good practices, or something that quantifies your greenhouse gas emissions. You can do an LCA analysis of your product, etc. Financing climate change activities, like what Bas says before. So there are a lot of existing carbon schemes that you can actually use. From the dairy sector, we are actually committed, we have a political commitment that we signed in 2016 together with FAO to be a more sustainable sector, to achieve all the SDGs. Nowadays, we account for 2.9% of the greenhouse gas emissions worldwide, but we are improving even more. There's a new report that was released this year when they saw a decrease of 11% everywhere. This political commitment that we have signed with FAO has now 28 signatures, so 28 countries or regions where the dairy sector has committed itself to reduce climate change. From the IDF perspective, I was going to talk a little bit about LEAP. We have this, this project that is to assess the environmental performance of livestock at worldwide level, so to give the global numbers. The Livestock Environmental Assessment Partnership is hosted at the FAO and started right after the Livestock Long Shadow report was launched, with the goal to assess really the impact of the livestock on the environment. So before, there was a calculator of FAO called the GLIM, the Global Livestock Environmental Assessment Models, that delivered all these nice maps on total emissions and emission intensity. So FAO was given a lot of data on greenhouse gas emissions. And I think from next year on, this calculator is going to incorporate a lot of new data on biodiversity impacts, carbon sequestration, nutrient flows, and water use. So there will be a measure giving global numbers on what is the impact of all the livestock systems on all these aspects. So we have all these different countries that have signed the Dairy Declaration, and I'm sure many other countries have programs in place, and I wanted to give you just an example of what's going on. For example, in Europe, I chose France. Probably you have heard about these programs. They have a national program for a low-carbon dairy farm, which is shared between the farmers and the whole dairy sector of France. I think there are 70,000 farmers involved in this plan. And the goal is to even reduce further the greenhouse gas emissions. So between 1990 and 2010, they reduced 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and they still have a task of reducing further 20% by 2050. The whole program consists of various activities. One is Climat-Lait, and actually is trying to help the French dairy farmers to adapt to climate change, because obviously it has an impact on animal health and the crop production and the milk production, and they provide technical solutions to the French dairy farmers to adapt their dairy systems to climate change. And they also have other schemes to tackle climate change, so they measure the contribution of the dairy farmers to greenhouse gas emissions, also their carbon sequestration with a tool that they have, and they produce technical solutions for reducing carbon milk footprint. So in Europe, I'm sure there are many more schemes like this, but I'm going to give you now other examples of other regions of the world. In South America, now the dairy sector is going for sustainable intensification, at least in the tropical regions. And I put here the example of Brazil. They have this national program called Carbon Neutral Milk. And they do the sustainable intensification using the integrated crop livestock forestry systems, also the silvopastoral systems, as you know. In the last 10 years, I would say even 15 years, in the graph here you can see that this type of systems is growing really a lot. And it occupies now 11.5 million hectares of all the Brazilian area. And obviously, it is very good in terms of environmental sustainable intensification because it has reduced the carbon footprint by 55%. The animals can be in the shadow, so the thermal stress is reduced, and they have better animal welfare. They consume less water, you use less land, and the biodiversity and the soil quality is improved. Now this program is driven by Embrapa, which is the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation. And the next step that they have is to register this Leite Carbono Neutro as a trademark of Brazil for milk, to be able also to have a better selling to the consumers. And Brazil exports nowadays 34 billion liters of milk worldwide. So it is still not in place. They have something similar for beef, where it's coming really soon. And in North America, they also have a program, even though they have been doing very, very good. The US dairy farms have now the lowest average greenhouse emission intensity of milk production globally, with 1.3%. And they have only one cutoff that they did in 2007. So between 2007 and 1994, they already produced 63% less of carbon. And they will have a new cutoff coming now this year. So even though they are doing really good in terms of greenhouse gas emission, they still have this voluntary stakeholder aligned and unified US platform called the US Dairy Stewardship Commitment. And this is mostly for their consumers, for credibility, and as a compromise. So they also have plans that they implement so farm environmental stewardships, they have a lot of information on greenhouse gas emissions, on energy use in the farms, and they have a lot of guidance on how to even reduce further. So just to say that for us, the climate change is really driving the production for the dairy sector. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I was wondering why the low emissions for USA dairy is partly due to the fact that they are stabled most of their farming career, whereas, of course, in some of the countries in the EU, we have the obligation to put our animals out to pasture during the summer months, which is also something a lot of the consumers want to see. So could you comment on that, please?
Yes, I don't think, I just coming back to the French example, I know they have measured the impact of the French dairy farms, even in pasture or inside, and they actually saw that it doesn't matter the system that you are using. It's that you have good farms and bad farms. Maybe someone from France can comment on this if it's here.
Yeah, I'll comment from a different perspective. I'm Patrick Worms. I work for the World Agroforestry Center in Nairobi, but I'm also president of the European Agroforestry Federation. And you mentioned the Embrapa-developed system, a silvopastoral system in Brazil, which is, of course, excellent. And what I wanted to stress is that these systems are not just tropical systems, they're also extremely efficient systems in the temperate zone. The effects that you see in dairy systems in North America are partly due to that. In Europe, as you point out, when you measure well-run farms, they tend to have, I would say, they tend to have more trees on them, and they tend to have much better performance. And it doesn't quite matter what system you use. But the one thing you need to remember every time is that you need to integrate ecosystem services right from the planning stage, which means trees. Finally, I received this in the mail yesterday from a friend in Vermont. It's a shirt that comes from a beef and dairy farm up there, and it says something very important. It's not the cow, it's the how.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. That's Angelo Damario, USCBV, European Livestock Meat Trades Union. I have a question about the slide with the figures about total greenhouse gases emission before, where you have mentioned, yes, exactly, this one. It's 2.9. So we have on the left side total worldwide, because in Europe it's of course less in terms of share, total worldwide livestock greenhouse gases emission, and then the left side we have production of milk. So my question is that, is this share representing the whole milk value chain, or does it account only for the milk production? I mean, does this include also dairy meat? Yeah, let's call that.
Yeah, 2.9 includes the meat, and if it's without the meat, it's 3.9.
Okay, thank you.
So only the milk, 3.9.
Thank you.